Question 26 is a critical thinking question. Jumping to the end, we can see we're being asked which one of the following is an assumption made by the above argument. So I'll start by talking through the argument. Despite years of butter and saturated fats being given a bad press, it has recently emerged that the studies in the 80s that highlighted the dangers of too much of these fats were based on a misleading data set. Consequently, the guidance based on these studies to reduce the intake of saturated fats cannot be justified. These studies suggested that a high intake of saturated fat was associated with an increased risk of coronary heart disease, and to counter this, they should only make up 10% of our diet. Now that this research has been discredited, we can once again enjoy the taste our grandparents enjoyed without risking our health. Option A says it's possible to enjoy saturated fat in a balanced diet. Now, is this an assumption made by the argument? Well, it's more of a conclusion after overturning the conventional notion of what a balanced diet is, which is 10% of diet, by discrediting these studies which justify it. So, it's advocating a new balanced diet, one would say, in which fats are a much greater proportion. So this is an assumption made by the argument. Option B says the assumption of the argument is that coronary heart disease is caused by a range of factors and dietary risks. Well, the argument doesn't necessarily advocate what causes coronary heart disease, apart from discrediting the notion that it's caused by high saturated fat intake. So we can't say that this is the assumption. Option B says the assumption is that other, more robust studies have not subsequently suggested a risk to health from saturated fat intake. Now, this is a credible assumption because the entire argument seems to hinge on these 80 studies which it goes on to discredit because of their misleading data set. It doesn't talk about any studies which may have occurred since then, in the 90s, in the noughties, whenever. The point is that this entire argument that we can enjoy the fats that our grandparents did because of this 80 study being discredited isn't necessarily valid. Option D is that the assumption made by the argument is that people follow public health advice and limit their saturated fat intake. Now, nowhere in the piece does it suggest what the public do or don't do, so this is an extrapolation. Option E says the assumption is that it's possible to conduct long-term studies that can be used to draw meaningful conclusions about health. Now, this piece doesn't seem to rest on that assumption at all. In fact, all it seems to do is to discredit the one study that was cited, namely one highlighting the dangers, because of the grounds that it had a misleading data set. So we can say our answer is C, that other studies have not subsequently suggested that there is a risk from high saturated fat intake.